Welcome to the Village Boy Podcast. Whew, it's never a dull day in the political arena. Never a dull day. Never a dull day. It's a lot going on. This gentleman on the screen is a South African ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool. And we just got breaking news this morning. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, tweeting this morning that South Africa's ambassador to the United States is no longer welcome in our great country. Ibrahim Rasool is a race baiting politician who hates America and hates the president. We have nothing to discuss with him, and so he is considered persona non grata. If you guys remembered from the one of the very first videos we did when this whole land reclamation was happening, and I had said the way Trump was acting was out of character for an American president because he had not consulted with the ambassador at the time. I had not even done any extensive research on Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool. I had not done any research on him, but I thought the process at the time would have been you bring in the ambassador to be what is going on in South Africa? What is this whole conversation with reclaiming of land? Either ways, I never even saw it as a need that America should flex its strength because that's a sovereign country. They had internal problems and they can handle their internal problems. But what we saw was the president immediately rushed to the rescue of white South Africans with information that was not correct, information that was firmly wrong. And he immediately said the Afrikaans and Boers are going to have asylum in America and they can buy land in Iowa and Idaho because generationally these are farmers. So they're going to continue on the farm business, and they rushed. We saw videos of them rushing. So for me, I knew that there was some kind of escalation in the South African and American diplomatic relationship, but I didn't know it was this bad. So when I heard that they had kicked out the ambassador and essentially given him 48 hours to to leave, I was like, what exactly was the issue? What was going on that needed that immediate declaring of him persona non grata? Because that's strong, and it's coming from the Secretary of State. And that would have been on orders of the president. So, what would was it retaliation for the actions of South Africa, or was it something that the ambassador had done himself? So, at the time when I heard this, I had to go back and look to find out who this person, because you have to know their history. You just can't get emotional and start reacting to stuff. You have to be able to you have to be able to know exactly what happened when the South African government put in place land reclamation policies, which every country in the world does, right? America does it. Every country. It's called eminent domain in the United States of America, right? And so South Africa did it. The whites who make up 8% of South Africa own 75% of the land. No doubt, when our apartheid fell, you would have seen a massive exodus of white people because they would have been scared that black South Africans would come into power and overshadow them. But that didn't happen. The reason why that didn't happen was because they had something that was more valuable to them than power. They were able to give up power, but retain that which was very valuable. And what was very valuable to them was land. They own 75% of South African land. Leaving administrative power was not an issue for them because they had the land. They essentially own the country and they only make 7%. So when Trump was picking this battle, I was like, either you don't know South African history or this has to be a racial issue because I know for a fact you don't know South African history. I mean, you're an American, you don't know South African history. And you're You're just jumping on this issue and immediately offering um, the whites of South Africa a way out. And that was strange for me, right? Trump has a history of doing strange things, but this was uniquely strange because next door, right above South Africa, not too far, is the Congo, and they're going through a lot of political unrest. Not once has he mentioned, just to mention it, just to say, we see what's going in the Congo. But in South Africa, he was looking at the humanitarian conditions of the whites. Kicking an ambassador is a big deal. South Africa can also kick the ambassador of America to South Africa back to Washington, D.C. I decided to look at and go deeper and say, what did this ambassador say that actually triggered his essentially getting dismissed out of the U.S.? And I saw a video, but it didn't really tell me the entire story. So I found a Breitbart article, right? I'm going to share that here. So Breitbart is usually, I think it's Steve Bannon that owns it. It's a right-leaning publication, and it reads South African Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool. I think I like that name, Rasool. I hope that's how you pronounce the name. Trump is leading global white supremacist movement. So that's what apparently the ambassador said, that Trump is leading a global white supremacist movement. This is what led to the ambassador getting kicked out of America. In a country that promotes freedom of speech, in a country that says they're all about your right to speak your mind, we're not necessarily always going to agree. And this is how they're kicking somebody who, and we had the vice president go to Europe and lecture the Europeans, their cousins and brothers in Europe, that they're they're stripping away First Amendment rights, freedom of speech, and stuff like that. Now the ambassador, I thought it was a white man, but apparently he is a second generation Indian who settled in South Africa for years. That's how dynamic and diverse South Africa is. I don't know if decorum, diplomatic decorum, allows for an ambassador to have this kind of rhetoric, this kind of conversation. And if that's why they're kicking him, because he's not following the diplomatic ethics in essence. But we've seen people on the left, the liberal lunatics. We've seen them call Trump all kinds of names. I mean, Hitler, Stalin, fascist, Nazi. We've seen them call him all kinds of names that are deemed worse than probably saying Trump is leading a white supremacist movement. But would you argue, if you look at face value, that a sovereign country has a problem? A sovereign country for most Americans just means an independent country, a country within its own rights, right? A standalone country, right? So a sovereign country like South Africa has its internal issues, right? And an external power is meddling with the affairs of that country. Do you think that at any point in time America had a say in what was happening in South Africa? No, I don't think so. I don't nobody, even if anybody was getting hurt or anything, it's not America's place to determine the fate of the white people in South Africa, because then you would have to do that for every other person. You're not gonna just say, I want to do this only for white people. Then yes, then there are grounds to look at you and maybe want to question your motives, right? There's no situation where you specifically isolate the white people of South Africa and you're offering them a gateway out. You're saying, "Oh, come get refuge in America." There's no situation where that makes sense. Because, like I said, in Congo, that conversation is not being had, and the people in Congo are actually going through worse times because they're getting killed. White South Africans are not getting killed in South Africa, right? And especially not the right, the right, and not people that outside of America that know anything outside of America. The right, the closest thing that the right knows outside of America is Israel. Outside of that, the right does not know anything else, right? The right is strictly America and Israel, because Israel is the capital of the United States from the viewpoint of the right, right? So when you have a president who eh, who says, "Oh, white people, if you're suffering, if they're taking your land, rush, come back to America." Doesn't that beg the question to say, why white people? Would you do that if the situation was any other race of people, Indians, Hispanics? Uh, uh, um, would you do that for them? This is what the ambassador said, and Breitbart goes on to say South African Ambassador Ibrahim Ras told participants in a foreign policy seminar Friday that U.S. President Donald Trump is leading a white supremacist movement in America and around the world. Uh, what we know that he's leading is a nationalist movement. Back to South Africa, Rasul was addressing. I'm going to butcher this name. Mapungobe Institute of Strategic Reflection, Mistra, in Johannesburg, in attempting to explain Trump's recent foreign policy stance against South Africa's property expropriation. This again, so we go back to that land expropriation. You cannot have. I don't care who you are or what you believe. You cannot have 7% of the population own 75% of the land. I don't care what race. I don't care what breakdown. You cannot be the minority population and you own all of the land. Okay, so right, left, center, hush it up. Hush it up. In nowhere does it make sense that 7%, 8% of a population owns 70 to 75% of the land. Uh, That is why when they got kicked out of power, they never left because they had all the power in the land and in the resources. When you have the land and the resources, what do you care about power? What do you care? You can control that. Politics is a tool that you can control once you have the resources. And when you look at the Black Americans, they don't have the resources and they don't have the power and they don't control anything. Once you have the land and you have the resources, you buy the politicians. Look at Elon. He put in 300 million. What do you think his $300 million was supposed to do? Was supposed to buy an election for him. Was supposed to buy a politician for him for whatever agenda he wants to push. When the liberal sugar daddy buys an election or sponsor all of these politicians, what do you think he's doing? He's buying an election to push an agenda. Politicians can be bought. So, and if this one loses power, you buy the next one. They are always bought. When the white South Africans lost power, that was not an issue for them because they had the assets, they had the land and the resources. They didn't care about power, and that's why they didn't run out of South Africa in 1994 when they lost power. And when South Africa is trying to right that wrong and say we need to be able to redistribute this land because you guys just have all the land to yourself, and America runs out of it. Oh no, they're getting oppressed. They're taking their lands away. 7% of the population own 70% of the land. Madness, total madness. Hear me? Madness. Even in America, that cannot happen. And the vast majority of people that own the resources in America are white people, and white people make the majority of America. You're not going to argue with that. You think that white America would have been okay if black Americans owned 70% of the land in America? You think that would have been something or any other demography? No, it would have never happened. In America, whites own the majority of the resources. They are the majority. It's not up for debate. That's just what it is. They're just begging them for crumbs a little bit, and for the most part, they don't even want to share. In South Africa, it's the reverse. And the right is out here agitating. And now that the ambassador says, "Oh, the president is proning us pushing a white supremacist movement," he gets kicked out. First Amendment, is that a thing? Is this just that ambassadors cannot talk this way? If ambassadors cannot talk this way, by all means, he can be kicked out because he should have known decorum. I'm all about decorum. But if we're pushing First Amendment rights, then he should be able to say whatever he wants to say. He's advocating for his country. He's not a pro-American ambassador. He's the ambassador of South Africa. So he's going to push the narrative of South Africa, right? And so there's something I was reading here that he has ties to Hamas. Let me look for it. I just saw it not too long ago. And its alliances with Iran and Hamas, among others. So yeah, I saw somewhere that he's also been very aggressive with his ties and connections with Palestine and Hamas. He has received a couple of awards from and met with some leaders of Hamas. So things like that. When you know Israel is the 51st state, you have to be able to be diplomatic. This is why you're an ambassador. So you have to be diplomatic and you have to be able to manage your language and your word, navigating this space where you are just surrounding yourself with the things that America does not want, right? He said the white supremacism was motivating Trump's disrespect for the current hegemony order of the world, including institutions like the United Nations and the G20. I remember when this thing broke out, immediately the Secretary of State rushed and said he was not going to participate in the G20 summit. I was just like, that's just childish. That was really childish. That you are not going to. It just sounded like two kids were arguing and you guys are refusing to talk to one another. That was childish, right? And I don't even think America planned to attend the G20 summit because it was in Africa. I don't think that they would have gone. What they just used that as an excuse to not just go to Africa, right? Because in Trump's first term, I don't think he had an African policy, and I don't think he's going to have an African policy for his second term. So that's not going to be a surprise there. Uh, the ambassador, he also said that the Make America Great Again movement was a white supremacist response to growing demographic diversity in the United States and suggested that South African farmers who had presented African grievances within the United States were part of that global effort. I mean, First Amendment, um, he, either as an ambassador, he cannot talk like this, or either he has freedom of speech. He should be able to say the things he wants to say. It cannot be both. It cannot be both. And if you are pushing the First Amendment rights, then he should be able to speak like that. You don't have to like it, but that's the way outsiders perceive. That's why Democrats call you guys these names, because this is how you portray yourselves. And we've gotten to a place where I'm not gonna lie. Elon Musk is doing some decent work. I'm not seeing evidence. That's why I'm not saying great work. I'm saying decent. He's doing some decent work, exposing some of the things he's exposing. But Elon is the byproduct of the most racist regime in South Africa. He came out of that. Elon left South Africa when he was 17 and went to Canada. What do you think what kind of household did you think he grew up in? Most of you see Elon, most white Americans that have grown up in a community, in an inclusive society. Elon Musk did not grow up in an inclusive society. He grew up in a South Africa that was segregated. This is what he knows. To see the things that he is pushing and the movements that he's supporting across Europe, they're usually far right movements, extremist movements. In Germany, the party that he was supporting, an extremist party. So when they call you these things, it's not because there's not a little bit of stain to it. There's something to it. It may not be exclusively true, but there is some level of truth to it. There's some level of truth to it. So let's go ahead and listen to what the ambassador said that triggered the White House to kick him out. Here goes the ambassador.
The second discontinuity is almost that I think what Donald Trump is launching is an assault on incumbency, those who are in power, by mobilizing a supremacism against the incumbency at home. And I think I've illustrated abroad as well. So in terms of that, the supremacist assault on incumbency, we see it in the domestic politics of the USA, the MAGA movement, the Make America Great Again movement, as a response, not simply to a supremacist instinct, but to very clear data that shows great demographic shifts in the USA, in which the voting electorate in the USA is projected to become 48% white, and that the possibility of a majority of minorities is looming on the horizon. And so that needs to be factored in, so that we understand some of the things that we think are instinctive, nativist, racist things. I think that there's data that, for example, would support that, that would go to this wall being built, the deportation movement, etc., etc. So I think I mentioned that. I think that there is also an export of the revolution. It's no accident that that Elon Musk has involved himself in UK politics and elevated a Nigel Farage and the reform movement in much the same way that it was instructive that on his way to the Munich Security Summit, Vice President Vance addressed the Alternative für Deutschland to strengthen them in their election campaign. And that then begins to say, what was the role then of Afrikaners in that whole makeup? And very clearly, it's to project white victimhood as a dog whistle, that there is a global protective movement that is beginning to envelop embattled white communities, or apparently embattled white communities. It may not be true, it may not make sense, but that is not the dog whistle that is being heard in a global white base. So I think we need to understand all of that. Another discontinuity, it's almost that they are putting a supremacist insurgency against the incumbency, and therefore we need to rethink our old categories of rationalization, because in that category there are mainstream Republicans like Mitt Romney and so forth, that are seen as part of the incumbency, that are also embattled. And so it's an intra-party insurgency as well as a global insurgency. The second
The things you just heard in the last 3 minutes and 28 seconds, had, have you not heard all of these things before? They've called him racist, white supremacist. He supported this. He supported the Charlottesville this. Those have been debunked. But these are labels that Trump has been called before. These are labels that MAGA has been called before or described before. I for the life of me, I cannot understand if is this it? This is what he did. This is all he said, that Donald Trump is pushing a white supremacist agenda, and he got booted out of the U.S. Is that where we are as a country? Where if you don't like what somebody, again, if the ambassador broke decorum, diplomatic decorum, in getting into the political conversation of a country. Again, these diplomatic conversations I'm not privy to, and I don't know if this is a process where, as an ambassador, you're not supposed to engage in political conversation to this extent, then yes, I would concede that yes, he gets kicked out. I'm big on decorum. You have to always, when you're in this professional setting, you have to be able to respect yourself, put yourself in check, and control yourself and not act out of impulse or out of your emotions, no matter what. And but if he did not break any decorum or any norms, any diplomatic tradition, then this is a First Amendment violation. This is a free speech violation right here because he has not said nothing that has not been said before. So in this case, what does South Africa do? Your ambassador just got kicked out. What do you do in return? And so far, South Africa has been pushing the narrative of appeasement. Let's calm down. Let's be the bigger person. Let's talk about ourselves before. Let's not rush to make any decision. Maybe they're saying that. Maybe they're accepting their. If you just look at it at face value, maybe they're accepting that their ambassador was out of line for stating those things. Being an ambassador, if he goes now to become a private citizen, he can have this conversation. Julius Malema says was he's a private citizen in the eyes of Americans. But this is the ambassador, this is the former ambassador to the United States. And he has been given 48 hours to leave. Where does South Africa go from here? Do they pacify themselves and say, okay, our ambassador was wrong, give an apology to the president and say, no, you're not a Nazi, you're not a racist, you're not pushing a white supremacist agenda? What are these possible steps that South Africa can take to address the situation and also put its stamp as a sovereign country? I'd like to hear in the comment section what you guys think should be South Africa's response. And if you've liked this content so far, please smash that like button, hit the subscribe button, and thank you for supporting. Thank you for watching. It's been the chief priest of the village.